In New Zealand.
Only one person. New Zealand. I thought I could say whatever I wanted.
We might kick off since it's just after 4 and we have a fairly strong and action program for now and until 7 o'clock. And lights go off, we're going to make sure we're out 10 past off. It's an austerity measure from the university. So I'm Tom Kelmer, and I'm the chair and patron of the Poche Centres Network, and we're here today as part of that network, and it's a collaboration between Poche Centre at the University and Poche's Flinders in Adelaide, and so we organise this seminar. This is one of a number of seminars, but before all of that, can I begin acknowledging that we're in the land of the Gadigal people of the Aurora Nation and pay my respects past and present, but also to recognise youth, as we do for all youth, because our youth will be our future leaders, custodians of our stories, our cultures, and it's really incumbent on all of us as adults. We have some young people here as well, but as adults to be able to create that future and create the for our people to come through, our young leaders to the future, and so recognise our youth. Before I proceed anymore, can I invite Ray Davidson up? He's a representative of the Land Council, and will just do us a welcome to country on behalf of his people. Uncle Ray.
Just before I country, I was just sitting over there and reminiscing to myself. I've just retired last. I've worked in health for the last 32 plus years, and I deem myself fortunate to. I have two elders that share their welcome to country with me. Or our clan. And I deem myself very lucky to, actually it's the second time that I've come to the Poche on one of your ceremonies. And it's touches me. I was sort of lucky in the sense that association with health that I came across, because it really does touch the heart. Just in conversation with a couple of ladies at the front there, we found that they worked in what we call back in that the early 80s was the anti-poly. Some of the first clinics set up. I worked at the service in Redfern and Uncle Liv and Naomi Mayers, and we had a good captain for all those. We grew in health, and one of those clinics was the anti-poly clinic, and to actually meet two people here today who were it's quite touching for me, and it's like I'm saying, it makes the heart warm. I look at the traditional owners, my people, the Gadigal people, and pay respects to elders past and present, and welcome you all here today to Aboriginal land. And just before I go on, I'd like to explain a little bit so non-Aboriginal people can understand where we're coming. The Aboriginal people within the room will understand totally that when you go home to country, you know you're back on country, And I'm on country now, so my soul's pretty happy all the time. I know when I go away, and I know when I come into the boundaries of my country, because my soul tells me. All Aboriginal people have that, and no matter what part of Australia we live in, we always know when we go home. And we've had that traditionally for thousands of years, because welcome to country has its origins on the east coast of Australia. Welcome to country was always formed. We had big corroborees, big celebrations. It was formed by song and dance. And welcome to country today is really important in the sense of, if you're a non-Aboriginal and you're born on Aboriginal land, you're part of our culture as well today. You're part of Mother Earth, as we say. So you're part of whatever country you were born in. When I say country, tribal area that you were born in, you're part of that land now, the same as we are. And when I give welcome, as I'm doing today, I welcome you to my tribal land. Or when I do welcome to visitors from overseas, I do welcome for you as well to them to our tribal land. So once again, it's a great pleasure to be here to invite you all to Aboriginal land. The Gadigal people are one of 29 tribes that make up the Eora Nation. And our tribal boundaries are the three lovely rivers of Sydney, the Hawkesbury River, the Nepean River, the Georges River, and naturally the ocean beyond me and waters beyond. Within that area are the lands of the Eora. And once again, I'm happy to be here to invite you once again to Eora land. May the spirits of my ancestors walk beside you and protect you while you are on Gadigal land, as I know they walk beside to protect me. And once again, thank to the organisers for the invitation to come on today. It's been a short but wonderful little experience for me, because like I'm saying, what I said there, brother, I just reminisced back quite a few times, quite a few different places over the years, working in the health and it just took me back to places when I was working on a dental van, and you go to country areas and you know, you'd be there for 3 months and you go to some other town and all that sort of got pushed in the back of my mind now. I'm that old, but it's all fresh now because I've done this today. So, well, thank you very much. And once again, welcome to Aboriginal land.
Thank you.
Thank you, Uncle Ray, and it's always good. It's, you know, what a great sign of reconciliation, you know, for Aboriginal people to be welcoming other people onto our land, considering, you know, the past as we went. But it's also a great opportunity to introduce a very important topic on cultural competence and how do we start the process. And that's one way of starting it, is understanding whose land we're on and starting to develop an understanding about why we want to be on it. This is the 5th of the Poche Centre's Key Thinkers Forums. And the concept is really about bringing together a whole range of experts, policy makers, community members and practitioners to come together and to discuss really some contemporary issues, or in each of our cases, there is one key theme that we follow, and it's all to do with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. And so, you know, that's what the Key Thinkers Forums are about. We like to take it in a fairly casual but a little bit, I guess, controlled way. It's a sort of a blend for those people who are from Australia to understand the Q&A format and the insight format. You know, it's a few questions, a couple of provocative speeches, solicit some questions from the audience and have a dialogue. But there are some common themes. The topic today is a very important one about cultural competency, and we've titled it Finding Common Ground, Avoiding the Terminology Trap. So I hope that it's you've all had the chance to have a look at the briefing paper that we sent out, introducing this session to us. If you haven't, they are available, or they were outside, and that'll give you an idea of some of the questions that we think you know, need to be addressed here. Today we've also doing something that we haven't done before, and that we've this whole session, not you guys, but us guys out the front here, are being live streamed on a webinar. And so we have, and that's that little camera on the top up there. Hi folks, on the top of this whiteboard at the front here, that's scanning across to us. We've currently got, I think, around about 15 people online, or 15 centres online, including some participants from New Zealand, kia ora, and people from around Australia, but around New South Wales particularly. So it's an opportunity to be able to contribute to, in the medical faculty, the Slice of Lime seminar series, which is about making sure that we get leaders in medical education sort of forums. And so welcome to our online participants. You'll see every so often on the screen somebody else will log on or log off, and they can't do that anonymously because their name pops up. We have 4 guest speakers here today who will inform our discussion. The first is Dr. Rhys Jones from the University of Auckland, then Professor Jacinta Sherwood from the University of Sydney and the National Centre for Cultural Competency, Dr. Melanie Turvalon, who is here from the former Director of Multicultural Curriculum Project and the Children's Hospital and Research Centre at Oakland in California, and Barry Lavalle, who is a director with the University of Manitoba's Centre for Aboriginal Health Education in Canada. So we've got some great speakers who will bring a really broad cross-section of perspectives here. And so I urge you to think about the sort of questions that you want to ask and take the opportunity to ask them while we're here. We want it to be a frank and really outcome-focused discussions, and so it's about you as much as about the presenters giving information, because the robust exchange of ideas is the best way to learn, I believe. We've got some roving speakers, Chris on this side, Yvonne on the other side, so if you want to ask a question, make a comment, just raise your hand and they'll come along and present you with a microphone. All we ask is that if you could just mention your name, if you want to, your organisation, and then ask the question. Try not to go into a big discourse about your favourite topic, or hobby. Save that for the end of the year when you're doing your final assignments. It's all about here. We'll also be taking some photographs as we go along, because what we try to do is to put them up on our Facebook as part of social marketing, as you guys more than us know all about social marketing and getting it out there into the atmosphere. So, but if you don't want to get your photo taken, just indicate that to whoever might be just poking the camera in your direction. It'll be somebody with one of the Poche's t-shirts, like Kylie has got it over there. Right. So at the end of this session, what we'll be doing is compiling a paper called the Poche Opinion. And we do this, and we've done this with the other 4, and so it'll be a compilation. We won't mention names, we won't attribute any brilliant ideas to anybody in particular, and we also won't name and shame you if you don't have a brilliant idea. But what we want to do is to be able to get the information that we collect, put it in a paper that can go not only to other fellow students, but also to policymakers, so that they can get a bit of feedback about what some of the community feels and some of the experts feel about the directions we need to take in certain policy directions. And so we'll have a Poche opinion paper on cultural competency at the end of the session. So enough from me. What we'll do is head off into our first question. And I'll also, I should say, be responding. We've invited people who are on the webinar to email us questions, and you'll also see them as they pop up on our screens over here. They'll be on the main screen, and what we'll then do is to ask those questions as we go along. So the first question for today is, do we have a terminology trap, and does it matter? Now, one, terminology trap, does it matter? And to be able to topic, I'd like to ask Dr. Rhys Jones from the University of Auckland to make some comments in relation to this. But before he goes on, since it wasn't included in your briefing papers, but Dr. Rhys Jones is a public health physician and current senior lecturer at Tikuonga, sorry about that, folks, Maori, for my Maori interpretations, at the University of Auckland. And as Director of Teaching, he oversees Maori health teaching and assessment in the Faculty of Medical and Health Sciences. His research interests: ethnic inequalities in health, Indigenous health professionals, and environmental influences. Reasonable investigation of the for study, an international research project examining how professionals education can reduce inequalities with the health outcomes of the Indigenous population. Human rights. Yes. Dr. Rees.
Kia ora. Kia ora, Tom. Me ngā mihi koutou kua hui mai nei tēnei wā. Ko Rhys Jones tōku ingoa he uri aho o Ngāti Kahungunu. He tika mai ana whenua o tēnei rohe, te hapu Gadigal o te iwi i ora. Nō reira tēnā koutou katoa. Everyone, thank you very much. Thanks, Tom, and thanks for the to be here. And I'm probably going to butcher the Aboriginal pronunciation as much as Tom.
I was going to zoom in on there, but you can't do it.
But I would, before I go any further, just to welcome to country and to Ray, and yes, acknowledge the of this land, the Gadigal people of the nation, and yeah, and thank you very much for being here and for being invited all the way from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And it's a pretty challenging topic I think we've got today, and the whole question of the terminology trap is an interesting one, because I think we do face this area in terms of cultural competence, or whatever you want to call it, where there are a range of different terms and often very confusing. One thing I did want to pick up on, though, before we go any further, is the reference to cross-cultural work in the title for this seminar, and have a little bit of a problem with the notion of cross-cultural. For one thing, I when I'm teaching my students, I always say, you know, every clinical encounter that you're going to come up against is a cross-cultural encounter, you know, unless you happen to be seeing a clone of yourself. Then yeah, that's going to be the case. And also I think the term cross-cultural tends to emphasize the difference rather than perhaps the power dynamics and the sort of the backdrop to every clinical encounter, which is the historical and contemporary domination, oppression, colonization that goes on. So I think we need to avoid that kind of language that conveys a level playing field, and rather one that kind of acknowledges that broader context that we're working in as health professionals. So what I thought, though, was how do we frame this seminar in terms of what we're talking about today? If cross-cultural care is just good clinical practice, then how do we put some parameters around what we're talking about in the seminar today? I'm really coming at it from the perspective of Indigenous health. As Tom mentioned in the introduction, that's my background, and so I think it's about, for me, how can we best advance Indigenous health through health professional education. In saying that, I think it's really important to draw a distinction between Indigenous health on the one hand and cultural safety / humility / competence and all those other terms on the other hand, that they're not the same thing, that obviously they are distinct areas within health professional education, even though there's quite a bit of overlap in terms of the foundational material that you need to be able to address those different areas. We risk conflating those things a lot of the times when we're talking about cultural safety and Indigenous. So I think for me, forum here is about how can we approach a learning like Indigenous health and distill from that vast array of concept terminology that's out there, the things that are going to be effective for what we're trying to do. So, as you'll see here, coming from, it would be remiss of me not to basis of cultural safety, and I think we have to acknowledge Irihāpiti Ramsden, who was the founder of this this concept really in nursing education, and acknowledge that whole kaupapa, that whole topic of cultural safety, kawa whakaruruhau, which came out of nursing education and from that background. I think I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but I think this is really a key platform from which we launch into this debate or this discussion, and provides actually a lot of really important principles that I think are things that we need to take forward. First and foremost, I think what you'll notice there in the first line is that it really acknowledges the power thing and actually has safety, cultural safety, as being defined by the recipient of care, not by the professional or the profession. And that's a really important thing in terms of who's got the power to define whether we're engaging in culturally safe practice. And you can see there some of the key aspects or key elements of cultural safety really, I think, are key in terms of acknowledging that, that power differential and really the focus of this whole area being on the health professional themselves. Okay, looking inwards at ourselves rather than focusing on what's going on here with the patient, what are their cultural beliefs and practices that are causing them to behave in this way. So always turning the lens back on ourselves. I think where I'm really is that it's really important to tease out what we mean rather than sort of rely to the and I'm going to say that in the end, I don't really particularly care what we call this whole area. It's more about articulating what we mean by it. And so yeah, steering clear of some of those semantics that we sometimes get into a debate about whether cultural humility is better than cultural security or whatever. So what is this area of the curriculum really trying to achieve? For me, it's about improving Indigenous health. You know, maybe a different angle for people working in different areas around cultural safety or competence, and achieving equity. Okay, so I think it's really about trying to achieve equity. And to be honest, I mean, I think that we have very little evidence to say that one type of approach is better than another in terms of does doing cultural security or cultural safety actually result in better outcomes for patients of those professionals once they get out into the workforce. So I think without having that empirical evidence, what we have to be guided by is thinking about, well, what do we know about what causes health inequalities and healthcare inequalities that we might be able to do something about through health professional education? And if we can understand those mechanisms, then we may be able to design some educational interventions and also some institutional reform to those things that are currently contributing to health care inequalities. Sorry, just stay on the other slide. Yeah, thanks. So I think we need some theory to really underpin. We might opt for one model over another, or we draw on certain elements of those different models. Really to try sometimes this black box approach that you start with a student or a learner, do this magical thing to them, and they turn out at the other end prepared to reduce healthcare inequalities and improve people's health. I think we have to look at what's going on in the middle there and try to through this analysis of how health is created and maintained, mechanisms going on there, how can we address those things that are currently driving healthcare inequalities so that we can achieve equity? And so this is pretty terrible slide, right? But what I'm trying to convey here is that we need to have some sort of theoretical model behind what we're doing. This particular one here, which comes out of the United States and tries to conceptualize how racial and ethnic inequalities in health come about in healthcare. Really, we're not trying to say this is the model we should be following, but it's one of the more sophisticated ones that I've seen. And so what we can do within this is we can look at all the different arrows and different processes going on here, and we can try and think, well, are there things here that can be addressed through health professional education? And if so, what types of things might we be looking for to try and avoid some of these processes that contribute to healthcare inequalities? And then we need to develop some sort of theory that guides us to, well, if these are the attributes we're trying to produce in our learners, what are the best educational interventions for getting there? What are the things that we need to do to our institution as well to ensure that students are supported to achieve those things? So, thank you. Don't have a lot of time to explore all these mechanisms and this hugely complicated diagram here at this point in time, but hopefully we'll get a chance as we talk more through the forum. But one thing I would like to point out is that these models, what you don't see in them is you don't see a lack of knowledge about the other really clearly in these diagrams. You know, it doesn't say, well, it's because doctors and nurses and people don't know enough about Aboriginal culture or don't know enough about Māori people's cultures. You won't find that in there. What you will find, though, is things that actually support a more critical approach. So looking at issues like whiteness, like power and privilege, like colonisation and racism and how those drive health outcomes, acting through a whole lot of different processes. So I think, in short, those are the things that we need to focus on. You know, the model on here, like any model, is subject to its own theoretical positioning. It's obviously actually have its own.
Okay. Ray, sorry. All right. Director of the National Centre for Cultural Competence. And I want to firstly, we're very available and very on site, and we'd love to see more students, more staff, more everybody and visiting. What competence? Well, I think it's a work progress. I'm very lucky as a nurse to be a member of the CAT and to meet Irahatwidi Ramsden and to meet Maureen Lanigan, who was transcultural nursing. I was there at the groundings of when cultural security, cultural safety, all of these ideas being discussed, explored, because we were working in health fields where people were being beaten up in the health settings. I have to say, unfortunately, that's still the case. And so we haven't quite yet got to our competency or our security or our safety. I'm hoping we will make a difference. Having a National Centre for Cultural Competence is a place where we're actually going to learn what does that mean. But I think my next slide is talking about it's important that we explore all the ways there. It's not just one way. And if we're not this is about recognising the diversity of people. If you can't realise the diversity of working with different ways of knowing and being and doing with people, then we've missed what cultural competency should be about. So there is great diversity in this field of knowing, and I guess having worked in health and working in education and having the opportunity to work in broader disciplines, I've been able to see that it is important that we deal with the semantics, that we do explore the theories, we do explore the pedagogies, we do explore those ways of rolling out how we do inform cultural competence, because we haven't done a good job so far. That's fairly clear. Our performance indicators are that we have good health outcomes, firstly for Indigenous Australians. That's a pretty good indicator. We've got to be really clear and accept that there are these are the issues that are, we don't need to necessarily build a whole lot of basics templates, because we've got some pretty clear evidence that the way we have been providing, or we think we've been able to raise cultural awareness and knowledge, hasn't worked. What I've learned is just how important it is that we build relationships around this story. And that makes a significant difference in relation to how we learn. I had, I guess, a unique experience when I was working in a health setting, where I was asked to, as part of my cultural training activity, was to take out nurse to a remote community in a bus to almost visit community like they're at a zoo. This is not culture. This is not how you provide a way of dealing with this approach. And in fact, it continues to perpetuate the power imbalances. Now, the whole idea of cultural competence, I've really taken strongly, is the ability to acknowledge that you have a culture. Yes, culture is that everyone has, that no one is monocultural. And with that culture, you bring your biases, your stereotypes, lots of issues along with you, your power dynamics. And problems, I've guess I've found over the years, people have problems actually acknowledging this space. And it is a space of, there is many, many cultures. And not acknowledging that space, we need to be promoting how do we do that. And I think what I've learnt over the years through my Indigenous research days is, critical reflection is the way to do it. My elders taught me to do this. My supervisors taught me to do this. It is something I had to learn. And I think a really important take from these models is decolonising. Decolonising my ways of being and doing health aspects from my education aspects, about trying to build my knowledge around the people I'm working with. And to be able to sit and listen and really hear the people I'm working with, rather than to think I know what people need. I guess working within health, I've really been able to see that our biggest issue in relation to competence is communication. Our energy to be open to communicating positively. And what we often do is do a lot of harm by thinking that we're too scared of people that we don't know. We're too worried people know that we're not sure. We're distressed, or, it doesn't look cool if I'm a doctor, what should happen next. And again, I'm going to go back to some really important stuff I've learned from my elders, is that always ask a question. Don't be afraid to ask. People are very generous in our communities, and if you ask the question, people are very prepared to give you the answer in a nice way. So don't be scared. I guess my next point, next slide, and I've lost it. Sorry. It's critical reflection. So how do we... What I think I'm learning as I've been here only for a couple of months is the way we do proceed is that we need to learn. If we're going to be able to teach the new doctors, the new nurses, the new business students, the new lawyers that are going to work, and they just as importantly need to be built, have their cultural competence. Everyone in this university to be supported in building those skills, be able to teach around building cultural competence. So it's not just, I guess, what I've gained is that this is a critical for health. This is a critical issue for the whole of this university. Everybody needs to be thinking about how do we build our knowledges, how do we teach these knowledges, grow these ways of really thinking our power, our decolonising impacts, our issues that make people feel uncomfortable, and how do we pull back so that we don't do any harm to the people we work with in every space and place. And I think we don't have a terminology trap. I think there's lots of things we still need to know. We still need to research, we need to evaluate, we need to practice in, we need to have lots of dialogue in. So more conversations, more discussion, and more opportunities to have a speak fest such as this. So that's me.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Anita, and I guess the big message out of that is, for me is, don't be afraid to ask, and it always intrigues me how, if any of us want to go overseas, well, no, two things. Firstly, when we talk about cultural competency, or this whole debate, and whilst our focus today is on Indigenous health, it affects all of us, all different cultures, and different locations. And the culture between an urban residing person, a rural and a remote, are all different. And so it led me on to thinking, it always intrigues me that when we want to go on a holiday overseas, we'll take the time to understand the people we're going to visit, try and learn a few words to be able to greet them, so that we're in that environment. And that's from business people, academics, just generally our tourists. When it comes to working with Indigenous people, we just throw that learning out the window, and we think, well, we think that they should be like us, and expect everybody to be the same because we live in a country. And I think that's one of the real points of this whole issue about understanding. But thank you for that. Did you want to just mention some of the key things that the National Centre is doing?
Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, we have on offer. Okay. Well, we have some wonderful staff there who are very happy to work with anyone, students, teachers, academics, to help develop ideas around building cultural competence in your curriculum, and talking about how we can do in growing those spaces. We're trying to provide some opportunities and working with organisations out of the outside city. So we're actually working with New South Wales Health at the moment in working in cultural competence. We've got partnerships with IATSIS and with Centre for Cultural Competence in Washington. We've got our establishment committee who's actually coming to meet with us this week. We're part of the hubs where I'll be able to. We're currently putting together a bit of a flyer on Centre, which we'll be able to have in the next couple of weeks, sort of highlight and demonstrate that we are doing and that we plan to do. We are a new centre, but we're going to grow with the university, and you're going to probably help us grow the directions that we need to grow into. So we're guys.
And you work faculty by faculty, making them understand about cultural competence and what it really means. So it's a big topical area. So let's kick it off with. Is that Leland down the back? Hi, big wearing.
Could I just, Kylie, from our online participants, they can't hear Yvonne's mic.
So
Working. Yeah.
Yes, batteries are very expensive.
We have this question.
Hello, that's better.
Thank you.
Lilon Bandler at Sydney Medical School. Can I take this opportunity to you on your...
It is to know those stories. And they're the stories that people don't have access to, and you didn't know. So again, providing knowledge, this is critical knowledge that people should know before walking into a community. And basically that's part of your, it is important to know whether particular communities, and I know from my time in Central Australia, the high rates of child removal were just incredible. And it is worthwhile. I mean, part of your, as Uncle Ray said, welcoming you to country and acknowledging, you know, welcoming you in, there's got to be some reciprocal activity. Being respectful of walking into that community. I often talk about Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and I talk about how Goldilocks is like a researcher in our communities. She knocks on the door and she walks in and she eats all the porridge, she breaks all the chairs, makes a mess of the beds, and then she runs when we rock up. It's about having a bit of to find out what has gone on. That, you know, and this is something that agricultural competence can guide and support you through and provide information in. These are important things because my other generational is won't necessarily want to answer all the questions. Again, it's important when you go into community, find other people you can ask the questions of. So it's not easy, but it's not easy. Going up to student officers and saying, oh God, I'm questioning the wrong person, and being sent around. Similar, you know, the organisations are difficult places when you don't know how to walk into them.
So I'm not from here, and so I want to preface my comments in that way, in a respectful fashion. And at the same time, I think for me, as I listen to your story, and I listen, Juanita, and with deep respect to all of your story and experience, and yours as well, all of the panelists and people in the room, what happens for me is that the mistake in and of itself is a learning. And so I think it is simply not possible for us prepared. You have to let go of that. If we will have all of the conditions in place in dialogue with each other across summaries, so much power and privilege, so much difference of historical experience. Wait for that moment is to wait for a luxury that will kill. I can't wait for that. And that we step into it and you bring it up and we talk about it and we learn from it and we think of, so what is it we haven't known that we should know to bring to that? I think that's the place that's important for us to be.
Any more questions? Up there? No, I'm going to come to the back here. So don't at half time. We'll just go and collaborate and come up with some good questions. We do have another question from the Akatuku from, and here's a bit of a process question. And I understand that we don't want to be trapped by the terminology. We know how effective efforts are. We have no agreed definition to measure it. So it's really one of those questions. And the second part of it, is it possible, in your view, this is you, Anita, the common ground by agreeing to a set of processes that improve cultural competency?
Well, I guess firstly, I would like to say that I've already talked about performance indicators, and I think that those, quite frankly, probably in New Zealand to Australia, an Indigenous health rate, and I think that that's important that we recognise that they are critical performance indicators, and we need to be talking to our people about why, what are the issues for them within the health services. Second part of the question.
Was really, is it possible to find common ground to a set of processes?
I think we have got ground. I think the whole idea, I mean, we're talking about safety, security, humility, competence, and there's another term, proficiency. These are all parts of steps towards working towards trying to not do harm to the people you're working with. And the actual communication around, and I think this is again what you just were talking about, Melanie, is that the dialogue is what's important. It's where we have these conversations. As I said, I was very fortunate to be around in the 90s when these conversations first started. They've evolved and they've evolved, and some agencies have taken them on, but not everybody has taken them on. So I suspect that rather than being bogged down by a definition, we actually need to expand our ways of knowing and being and doing about this. There's actually a whole lot more information and knowledge we need to grow in this space. And we know that by not doing this, we're actually hurting people's health. Remember that racism, it makes me sick? That's what happens.
Okay. Well, Liz, we'll give you one last quick one because we have to take a break. So go for it.
Well, just as, need the mic
For the sound, yeah.
If we're about to have a break, perhaps we could think about the concept that cultural competence needs to go in both directions. And, we are trying to also deliver a health service or conduct research or whatever with our Aboriginal colleagues. And I think having respect, we've mentioned that respect and humility and understanding and knowledge, really to have a successful collaboration, whether it be in delivery of healthcare or in the research or in the working towards anything for the benefit of communities. I think that there's no doubt that that understanding needs to be bilateral and can result in very successful collaborations with very good outcomes.
Thank you, Liz. And as Tony Jones would say, we'll take that as a comment. Yes. in that one. So
Can I just...
No, Reece has got an
not necessarily answer it, but maybe just to comment on that and also reflect back on the previous question from Riripeti. I think that's true that obviously respect and communication and everything has to go both ways, but we also need to recognise the power imbalance and the historical context and everything that's contributed to that, and hence my comments are at the beginning about the problems with the concept of cross-cultural, in that it tends to kind of encourage this approach of saying, oh, well, we're just different people. You've got a different culture, I've got a different culture, let's just sort it out, without recognising that that doesn't happen in a vacuum, that there's this whole societal and historical context to that dynamic that's going on there. And also just to comment, if I may, about the question about whether we need a definition so that we can actually have something to measure and something to evaluate. I think absolutely. For me, what that's about is not so much having words that we can all agree on, although that may be important. It's more about clearly defining the things that we think we're trying to achieve that will contribute to the outcome we're trying to achieve, health equity. And so that's why I like things like that horrible, complicated diagram that I put on the slide, because it does make those things quite explicit. And, you know, you can see things in that model like clinician implicit biases and attitudes, and you can, okay, that's something that we need to address. That's something that you can actually measure, and as people go through their education and training. And similarly with things in that model that are about the institutional context or the health system context in which people learn and practice, that, you know, those are things that we can actually do something about. And if we have agreed clear definitions about those things that we're trying to achieve, then we can more clearly monitor them rather than some possibly nebulous concept that we may not agree on the meaning of.
Thank you. Well, we will take that break and get these microphones all fixed up and all that sort of stuff. Here, can I just ask you to please thank Reese and Juanita for their presentations. After the break, we're going to the Pacific and get into the US of A and Canada and get some additional perspective. So think about it and come back later. Thank you. 20 minutes, 15 really.
I just thought that maybe in that instance they weren't, so one wasn't being turned off and then another one turned on, or I just put that up. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it is good. We just gotta, because I can see you. I'm hiding back here and I can see you bobbing, they can hear me.
Carry that around. Or at least I leave that on the front, they don't work on the front, and then you've got yours to work out. I'll try and get this. Kerry, where did you get the water from last time?
Oh, beautiful, that's what I gotta do for you.
You can do it, that's all right.
Well, don't you want me to?
Thank you.
Do something.
Oh, no, that's good.
That's what we're here, you know.
I'm really enjoying it. It's great. So I met you at the dental
Yes.
graduation.
Yes.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll come in.
Hello.
I think it just wasn't plugging in. Yeah, I can hear it. Yeah, it's working. It's working. I guess we can those are all working.
The top one that's hard.
I didn't know we had someone from Manitoba. They can
One, two.
Testing. Okay. So this is working now? Yeah.
I did know that people stepping on the cord.
Okay.
We get people not to step on the cord. Okay, I'll just write a note here. Could you please tell Tom don't step on the thing? Don't step on the cord. So just. All right. So where did it come out from? Just in case he does. I was telling not to.
So if it was just sitting up, make sure that's in tight. Beautiful. Like, yeah, that's definitely going to pull it.
They can't hear me, can they? No, because no, they can't because well, they can because they can. What is it on? Yeah, we're on. I wondered what would happen.
Sorry, did you?
Stuff. That's Miss.
Do you want to go 6? Oh, yeah, that's you. Yeah. 35? 30. Yeah, it's okay. Get it? Yeah. Nothing. And then you'll yeah. That's what I think for this one. What do you think? Like, when you have a debate only 62 of them. Oh, okay. It's going to have a long, but I think it will be when you have it this size. Because they're not going to get this. That's why in this one, that's why it's further back. High up off the ground, that they're not even going to be in the way, and they're going to be standing back here anyway. So that. Yeah, they're going to be. Yeah. The closer you put it to them, the less you put in the front. The closer you put it to the most it's going to be. Usually the problem is trying to get them out of the projection. It's pretty hard in this scenario. Yeah. Even yeah. You need anyway. I'm gonna get it. Like something will yeah, clean the strengths of this smart folks. More so you can go like just stuff. And I yeah. Yeah, yeah. What like it's kind of really there you go. And like yeah, which is totally but yeah, that's probably because I mean they it's like the designers all young and like it's how build the problem is what happens when you need it's gonna be like they see this is what it is.
Susan Ryan launched the age discrimination report. If you have a look at that and you hear what Lockie's going, this is just so far, out of what the government is saying. Here is complementary, recognising the value of the human and the great people, including Gillian Trigger. What the? Yes. And so I got back on. Just
The same, I think, our treatment. And I actually think the two are tied, how we treat work. It really was instead of it was colonisation. And I think that has affected the Australians.
yeah. We should be able to mute it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Stuff that I'm not there yet. The microphone's on.
Is it on now? Go.
So you can see you're coming to a meeting.
Yeah.
And you're going home tomorrow. I am. Oh, you'll be at the airport at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, later.
Later. I leave at 9, and then I get to Honolulu at 11 degrees.
You need them? Offered like they. Oh.
So I get home.
I just have one word things because you just have to keep me in one word. Okay? So I won't do a lot of stuff. It's a long time.
Yes. Yeah. I've just scribbled on mine. It's okay. Yeah, no, I totally, one side.
Yes, sirree.
Yes, sirree. Here we are again. There you go. The whole.
Thank you.
I believe that's it. Yeah. Just a few more moments on the other side of that. Oh, goodness.
Besides, people are so engaged. More engaged than they were at Adelaide.
Yeah.
Maybe they had the right kind.
I'm not sure either. I thought some, of course, I don't know in that same way. It's your land and all of that.
What's yours?
My sense was that there were so many people presenting what you said.
Yeah.
That there was some level of yes.
Oh, thank
Everybody had to present, so there's that kind of intensity and anxiety. And companies were so bad, oh, I got to get a and I was trying to figure out at what level to interact.
Yeah. No.
Oh, no, you're right, I won't go.
There's so many ways to level to interact. And, you know, the two of us were and that was, I would think it is, I would have
Very good, thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let me get organised.
a lot of, I feel like these things, there's a lot of richness, and I would feel like, yes, yes. Oh, Sunday, make sure that you try and get you up here. Right, he's going to. He's going to be on I sort of, and it energises us. It really does. But again, the weekend I just got slapped a whole lot of work when I was. Tonight I feel energized. Yeah.
Well, folks, we might kick off for the second half of our webinar, and welcome back after you got fully refreshed and student cohorts on all those questions that you can ask. We're waiting for you already. Apologies for not apologies, but we've moved the whiteboard up because our people on the webinar didn't want to look at me, they much preferred to look at the panelists. And so we've been able to accommodate that, we hope, and it's good. So the second half of our session, as I mentioned, we're going to look at some experiences from the United States and also from Canada. And the first of our speakers is Melanie Turlong, and she's going to discuss organisational change and cultural humility, which we touched on a little earlier. Dr. Melanie Turlong, Director of Multicultural Curriculum Projects, Children's Hospital, Centre of Oakland, California. And Dr. Turlong is a consultant and paediatrician from Oakland in the San Francisco Bay Area. Together with her colleague, Professor Jan Murray Garcia, she was instrumental in introducing the notion of cultural humility, cross-cultural discourse, and institutional change. And so what was our 10 minutes? Welcome you.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much. And let me begin by paying respect to elders past and present of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, whose land on which we are having this conversation today. So I've been asked to talk organizational change and cultural humility. You can see up here. But before I begin, let me just say a little bit about myself. I am an African-American woman from the United States. I grew up in the period of segregation in the United States, so I have lived this experience of a Black world and a white world in my nation, and so that you can understand the context within which I'm talking about the work that has been developed in the United States. Our histories are not identical as nations, of course, there are similarities. So the work of cultural humility comes about in the United States in the 1990s, 1992, right after Rodney King was brutally, they can't hear me, okay. Right after Rodney King was brutally beaten by police officers in California, and his beating was videotaped and shown around the world. The hospital I was working in at that time, Children's Hospital, we began once again to examine the kind of discrimination and differential treatment that was happening for patients that came into the hospital, as well as the kind of differential treatment that was happening within the staff. It was a children's hospital where primarily the physicians were white. I was one of a handful of Black doctors in the hospital, and the families that we served were predominantly people of color. As a result of the tensions in the hospital, more than tensions, difficulty in even working in the hospital that came about as a result of his beating, the hospital had to take into consideration what kind of response would happen in the institution to actually address these issues of racial difference and differential care, and create an environment that would work for people in the hospital, staff in the hospital, and for patients we were serving. I was called upon to direct a program called the Multicultural Curriculum Program in the hospital, and it started in a way that was unlike were starting around culture and difference in the country at that time, meaning that it was clear to us, those of us who were organizing inside the institution, that the hospital could not teach. Those at the upper end of the educational system in the hospital were in no position to talk about the cultural identity, circumstances, differential treatment of clients who we were serving, patients who we were serving. And so the community came in and taught. And so for a 5-year time, we had community education, and the cultural humility principles, as we call them, came out of that process. And I'm going to start just by mentioning to you, making a few comments about the term cultural humility. It was in direct contrast to, at that time, cultural competency, which arrives at least in 1989. And for us, we learned, meaning the hospital who were working in particular, this term humility comes to us because families are saying to us, could you just listen? Could you just take off that white coat that makes you think that you know about everything, even things you've never had contact with? Could you take that off for a minute and listen? Could you consider saying, I know? Could you consider that? And could you ask us? This idea of humility really sits in a place of not knowing, not humiliating oneself. No, because we have expertise and we bring to that process, but to understand our relation to power and privilege and who we are and the clients. And patients.
Health is that we have such a small population, and many of them actually don't present to our big hospitals. We don't have the contact because of the they have that they treated inappropriately or that it's a place that they don't feel comfortable to. So I think the model is fantastic. We should all be exploring that model because unless we can get our students early on immersed and understanding culture, whatever it might be, then we're not going to get our doctors having the sort of relationships with patients that will enable better health outcomes.
Thanks, Liz. That little curveball. Could the medical students please stand? So we do our bit. You please see. And just to the medical students, you're out. And we are eclectic in our definition and in our approach to cultural training. And yes, we turn on cultural and we are indebted to you for the model, but we use it as part of a much broader concept and definition of cultural training and cultural understanding.
Oh, and just, you can return the cards to me directly.
I wonder what those cards were. I thought they were just getting ready with all the questions.
They're questions for me.
Yeah, right, they're part of the assignment. Fair enough. Yes.
Can I just make one comment?
Yeah.
And for mentioning that you use the cultural model in your work, broadly speaking, and I want to say that from my point of view, I agree with my colleagues who have spoken already about the importance of finding some common language. I think that's the way I would like to put it, or some common principles that we share. Whenever I speak about cultural humor, I remind myself and others that I'm not interested in fetishizing that term. I'm not interested in acting as if it's held high in some way, or that it supersedes or overrides the other concepts that are present. And instead, we feel like we made a contribution along the way at a particular time in history in a way that was useful. If we think about where we're going, hopefully where we're going together to actually get to equity, that it's complicated and people put in a piece along the way. And if we continue in that way, that has got to be debate and dialogue and difference. No, I'm not saying the same thing you are. I'm saying something very different when that happens, and understand it and come to some place where overall language will work together.
I think, Mel, while you've still got to that, we do have one webinar question from Alyssa, and she is asking whether you're able to make a comment on the differences between the situation of Afro-Americans or Puerto Ricans versus Native Americans in relation to cultural humility.
So I'd love to have the person right here, a bit more conversation with him or let me say that states, the conditions and circumstances of each of the racial, ethnic, cultural arrived to the shores, originally the home of the Native American people, is very different. In that, as a Black person, most African Americans came to the United States as, imagine you know, or if you don't, this will be information, because of slavery and the slave trade in the process. People from Puerto Rico arrive in the United States for a whole host of other reasons related to employment and escaping different kinds of persecution. So the conditions are certainly not identical. What is shared is this experience of oppression and the experience of a white standard as the standard that is the one that is superior, and the other cultures, racial groups, ethnic groups, identity groups are inferior to that. And so that dynamic, to me, is identical to like I'm hearing here with the Aboriginal people and people, is the one that is central to cultural humility, carries across, and why our experiences, it resonates for people. That, at least for path to equity, is about better than me and I'm not better than you. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. So.
And Reese, I guess that would be a similar sort of experience in New Zealand between the Maori and the Pacific Islander community. We have one question. Oh, do you want to answer, or do you want to respond, or?
To say yes.
I think you're nodding.
I'm very concerned.
In the middle again.
Going to come out right, but we're talking, my colleagues and I, about the problems of how to apply this in our future work, and there's been some discussion of the importance of developing and maintaining relationships in order to improve communication. But we were wondering was, and I think it's possible to develop relationships in the blink of an eye, but we have to be able to do that sometimes in the context of, say, a 15-minute consultation. And you commented about the larger context that constricts people's abilities to make change, and part of our context will be that system of rushed meetings once with. So as a paediatrician and as a person who's worked in these contexts, what advice would you have to give us about how to do this relationship so quickly?
So at the risk of once more in being a person who goes against the grain, I'll say that as a pediatrician, I've practiced for years. I take every opportunity as an opportunity to establish a relationship with the, and it can be as simple as, welcome to this room that we're in, how's your day? How was it getting to clinic? As that kind of open-end invitation, not tell me about your child's ear pain first, right? How are you, how did you get here? What's happening in your life? To offer that up. And I also use the practice, relationships are built over time. A relationship meaning doesn't happen just like this. I've just met my colleagues here, and I feel like we're in relationship. Now, we're not in deep relationship, even after 5 days or so. That happens over time, but it has to be conscious. When I walk into the room, I must be clear that that's what I'm going in there to do. And in this moment, in this 15-minute interchange, to establish enough clear intent and through my communication that this is about you, it's not about me, right? I practice really hard at being certain that when I'm in a room, I'm not doing what I'm doing on this panel, filling a room with all the words and all the time, right? No, but that in that period of time, I want to be only as necessary. I want to be hearing of the person across from me. So, and those are some of the skills that we, and that can be taught, practiced, and can be modeled. And it's this piece, I think, of modeling that is so essential to as a person who's in the clinical setting, model what it means to go in and open up that conversation in a different way, and also to be able to model I don't know, right?
Just a quick comment from me too. I support what Melanie was saying then, but also recognize that that doesn't happen. It's similar and equal for everyone, and I think that when we're working with marginalised populations in particular, this is even more important to establish that relationship, to actually find out about the person, because otherwise you fall back on your stereotypes and your assumptions about that person based on the perceived culture or population that they come from. And so I think that's really important, that we it's not a one size fits all kind of process, and that we also need to challenge the systems that set us up for that sort of one size fits all type approach, and actually try to make sure that we invest more time and more of that engaging in relationships for people that need it more than those who don't.
I have a question.
Probably the 15-minute consultation in general die.
Yes.
Thank you. Do you have another question there?
Did you have a question?
No. Well, we did have another web question though, and Elizabeth asked us, and I'm not sure whether you can respond to this, but there might be some other analogies back in your home countries, but in Australia we have where Aboriginal children to be removed from their parents and culture, and there were many hospitals in remote Australia who were complicit in that process, and Elizabeth was asking whether you have any suggestions of strategies on how to address that issue. How do you build the trust between the community and the hospital, the same hospital that forcibly removed children?
Well, I won't call this advice. I'm going to just tell a story, since I think that may be more useful. So in the United States, as in pediatric settings, and in the hospital I was working in the 1990s, it also disproportionate practice of removing Black children from their parents, who, when mothers would arrive at the emergency room, and for example, the child is there because they're having trouble breathing, but they may have someone may have seen a mark on their arm. Rather than getting the physician to come in and see the child immediately, they'll call the social service worker to come and do all of these inquiries about the home life and what's happening, with the intent of interrupting that relationship and taking the child out of the home. This was one of the themes that came up immediately when we started the program at Children's Hospital. And the reparations required to build, and I wouldn't call them completely done, this is a long time after, what was required was, and what we had happen was, mothers and family members would come and tell their story to the entire hospital, including one circumstance, the emergency where that same situation happened. The man was sick, really needed a doctor, the care for asthma, and the person who saw them then called social work to come and talk about removing the child. Happened to be that the family was being seen by one of her able to interrupt that process. That mom came and told that story to the entire hospital, including the practitioners who were in the emergency room at that time, and there was a facilitated dialogue about it. So members of the community are there, and it did change. Some practitioners got up and apologized. It did change the sense and sensibility for some members of the hospital about the overriding discriminatory, racist practice of how we were seen as Black parents relative to our children. So I don't know how helpful that was. Similar circumstance and
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing challenge because of mandatory reporting responsibilities, which and it's really a contemporary removal that people are also very fearful of, as we're seeing more and more family members being removed for a whole range of different reasons. And but yeah, I guess that's the
Indigenous health. We fail you. Part of what we're trying to, where I work at the University of Manitoba, is to reconstruct a curriculum that lets you penetrate and to see in the of what is Indigenous health. And it's not about it's not about whether we wear feathers, it's not whether we aspire to Hollywood images of who we are as Indigenous people, but rather what we want the medical students to do upon exiting our medical school is to see Indigenous patients as fully human. Important for you as a practitioner to do. That's very important, okay? To see us as fully human. Because if you see us as fully human, what ends up happening is you will prescribe medications that we need. You will advocate for us through the medical system. And even if we're positioned structurally in systems of oppression, so as a medical student, I would, for example, I would challenge you to ask, why is it that Australian Indigenous communities have higher rates of poverty than the whiteness of this land? I would ask you to think about that continually through your medical education. Ask the questions, why is it that a racialized group in any of these settler countries find themselves situated in positions of powerlessness, of poverty, and the constructs that create high rates of type 2 diabetes, HIV, hepatitis C, all of those things. And if you don't do that, and if you employ what in my country is where we're multicultural, we treat everybody the same, you will definitely fail that community. I contend that. And that's based on literature, not that you'll find in the medical literature, but you have to locate this kind of literature in education, in the social sciences, which are much more critical in my mind than actually acquiring a medical degree. And I would suggest to you that the medical degree is a technician's degree. And that's not to say that we aren't important in the context of attempting to achieve health therapeutically with one patient or group of people, but we are not taught to think critically about what is so obvious to us. We never explore the elephant, or we never tell the employer he or she is naked. You have to do very important. Culture, we believe, and we're trying to, where I come in Manitoba, with our Indigenous, we're wanting to move away. We're wanting only to employ an analysis around settler power and privilege as a necessary construct of settler societies. And on the flip side of that is Indigenous disparities. So I suggest to you that the health for Indigenous peoples is socially constructed, state informed, it is state supported. And for the medical students, it's very important that you think about that and you question, why is it supported? And the impact, i.e. oppression, as it's shown with high rates of type 2 disease, loss of limbs, blind, occupation of dialysis units, for example, in some dialysis units, 1 in 3 people are Indigenous, and yet we only represent 10% of the population. And as a medical student, you must ask yourself, why is that so? And I want you to draw your analysis away from proximal behavior focus. Be very, very careful about that. Because the thing we fail really for you is we tell you that it is smoking, it is being obese, it is all of these things so important to health. Indeed, they might be if somebody is post-cardiac. But when you're looking at population base, it's more that racism actually is the strongest indicator of poor health for racialized groups, and including, where I come from, Indigenous peoples. And you have to leave Indigenous peoples out of the analysis of immigrants, of other peoples who are coming to the lands. Because I suggest to you that come to the homelands in any settler society, achieve equitable health outcomes within generations. Communities since 1492, when the first European said that they came to our lands, our health outcomes not improve. In fact, we're dying at different rates now because of socially and colonially constructed diseases, like diseases, for example. How many minutes? 2.
3.
Okay, good. I'd suggest to you that Indigenous health in medicine and healthcare is always safe for the Indigenous medical learner who share the seed in your quest to become a physician. And I'd suggest to you that medicine indeed is actually can perpetuate poor health outcomes in very real and collective ways. And changing the terminology fails to address a real cause of what we see happening in healthcare systems, feeds the resistance to change, and that is racism. And racism is a necessary construct to uphold this idea that settlers who enter homeland settler societies have power and privilege that you don't even recognize, or we can't see and we can't locate. And when we talk about Indigenous health in that construct, what ends up happening is that the medical learner and other people who are non-Indigenous, they become uncomfortable. Their belly hurts. They're not too sure why they feel that way. I'd suggest to you that is the process of self-reflection. And I'd suggest to you to embrace it. And I'd suggest to you to articulate it and to be open to learning, because that really is what self-directed self-reflection is, a continual process. Because if you don't do that, and if you don't end up in a system that will permit you to do that, you're going to be like a Borg. You're going to go back into this society and you're going to be reinscribed. That same settler power and privilege will be afforded to you. You won't be aware of it. And again, your mind will go to the position that Indigenous people are the cause of their own illness because they're obese, they smoke, they're alcoholics. You're going to position. So those stereotyping features are very important. The question was asked, what can you do? You have to be aware of how stereotypes are generated within you as a person who's non-Indigenous and in the construct of your world. Because if you can do that, what you've done is you've interrupted racism. Because racism has 2 arms to it. It has the creation of stereotypes, and you have, as a settler, and importantly, as a physician or a nurse, as a provider, power you have in that we create in you the therapeutic power to help people stop smoking, not people. But if you're not careful and if you rely on stereotypes and you use that power unknowingly, you people and you could kill them, is what I suggest. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry, and you picked up on some very important points there, and I think, you know, it's one of the ones that we should always reflect on. In 2005, the disparity in health for Australian Indigenous people was 7 years, and yet the Indigenous peoples of Canada and New Zealand was only 7 years and less, 6 to 7 years. So it's gone down a few years, or it's improved. Part of that improvement is attributed back to a new formula that they've applied to the same data to get a different outcome. So that's, you know, I think a very important issue. I think the issue you raised about diabetes, which is most important, and that a lot of our population don't understand or not been exposed to, that when we look at Aboriginal communities, and there's some very significant cases in Central Australia particularly, where where they have funds to be able to get dialysis machines, some millions of dollars through creation of art to sell to get a dialysis machine because governments weren't providing those services to them. And so it gets to, is it an issue of racism? Or is it, some, and I think what we haven't really touched on a great deal today, and that's the role of the media in how they present facts to people. And my message to many groups is that don't just become informed about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people by what you read or see in the mainstream or hear. Take that next step, which is to do a bit of research. And the people online with us is Melissa Sweet, who is one of the conveners of Croaky, who is the health advocacy group, who present a whole range of information about health generally, not only Indigenous health, to be able to push it through. And so Melissa's there. So I got that wind up already. So with that, are there any questions? Yes.
Yes, I'll firstly introduce myself. I'm Greg Pratt. I'm a Nunuk of the Quandamooka tribe, the Kuku Yalanjin, Kuku Taipan people of Far North Queensland. I'm also manager for Aboriginal Islander Health Research and Institute for Medical Research. And look, I find it very interesting your point about, expertise and its to, self-justify, it's and so forth. And reflecting, just thinking over the idea of how do we move us, from a which is very self-justifying, in terms of its importance, space which is technical, to one which, the importance of humility, of social process. And more than that even, I guess probably the reason that people are here in this room is because they're in a position of being active, actually the champions, they're the conduits, they're the catalysts for change. How do we go about motivating others who might not be in that position? Because ultimately, I guess, otherwise we run the risk of continuing to people validate position of power process, and we don't. They take no responsibility for, and they may never.
I'd love to give this to someone else, but but yeah, I guess that's the job of the National Cultural Competency Centre. We're going to be pushing those. We're encouraging the leaders that are here to work with us, to encourage others. we're very
on this Key Thinkers Forum. And Dennis has been project, which I hope you'll briefly, Dennis, what you're doing project and why you're able to bring such a group of people over to Australia.
I bribed them to South Australia, basically. Yeah, look, thanks, Tom. You'll have to forgive me, I had in Adelaide this morning and somehow I've developed a scratchy voice, ain't what it should be. And about the last week, along with all these people as well in Adelaide, some things we've had there. Look, very briefly, I'm a fellow from originally, a Koori man from New South Wales, now living and working on Adelaide. I'd like to thank Uncle Ray for his welcome to Gadigal country. My late mother was born in Salford Hospital and lived most of her first part of her life about 10 blocks away between Redfern and have a connection to Gadigal country through my mum's side. In fact, my grandfather, who I never met, was a Gomeroi man in New South Wales, which is where I grew up, so it's kind of full circle. This version, and before I launch into it, Tom said, I'm on a year of the National Senior Teaching Fellowship from the Office of Teaching, and it's to look at some of these particular talking about today, hence that's one of the co-hosts of our meeting today. It's to look about how we can do things better. Some of the aspects, and Barry very nicely touched on it in the last presentation, which was, I teach medical students too, and I do research around this educational pedagogical research. And there are two difficulties we have. And one is, how do we help students come into grips with challenging aspects of Indigenous health and cultural safety, stay engaged? It's difficult businesses. We talk about making the disquiet manageable. It's going to rock you. It's going to rock your certainties about the Australia you thought you knew. It's going to rock your political beliefs, what your family and church didn't tell you. So how can we help you stay engaged? And secondly, how can we get institutions, I think Barry might have mentioned about institutional accountability, how can we get our institutions to stop being resistant to these things and stop constraining funds and staffing, give us time and curriculum, help us along our way. So two nodes of this year-long fellowship I'm on, which this is one part. The other part was in Adelaide last week called Having the Hard Conversations. So if you like to find out some more about that, email me and I'll send you the report when it's finished. Okay, 8 minutes to go, I think. How do you do justice? I mean, Melanie talks about admitting that you don't know, and I totally concur. And I don't know how to do this wealth of stuff justice. This is the second time I've worked with these people as a group in the last little while, and I'm still finding gems all over the place. So I'm going to pick out a few things which I think might help us take that thinking one stage further along the journey. And starting with Rhys, and being from Aotearoa, he was lumbered with saying, well, tell us all about cultural safety, Rhys. You're the natural expert. And but to his credit, he said, well, cultural safety can be a key platform that provides a good place to launch what we're doing. And I agree with that. I think it's a nice way of seeing it. It's certainly made us aware of power differentials in our clinical and health promotional relationships. It's certainly made us focus on what's going on for the health provider. Not just the client in the fishbowl or patient in the fishbowl. It's called a transcultural paradigm. Here's the client or the patient on one side, and here's the health provider on the other side. And for too long in Australia, in attempts to do cultural awareness, we've focused on the numbers, put the spotlight on them or looked at them like a goldfish in a bowl. Now the going back to the practitioner and their service and saying, where am I coming from? What am I bringing to this clinical or health promotion encounter? As Rhys also said, there's very little evidence that one model provides a better outcome than others. So let's not get hung up on the models. I want to say also, as you've seen on some of the points though, it's important to be careful around where one model may delineate and constrain what we can do. Look for those very real barriers, but talk them through in a spirit of we're not here to promote one thing over the other. What are the key dimensions? What are the key processes we need to do? And that's not a helpful one. That's one that perhaps can get in the road. So thinking through on both those levels. And from there, I think Rhys went to is more sophisticated frameworks, more nuanced frameworks, and that lovely spaghetti diagram he put up, which is fantastic. I'm going to summarise that, Reese. But it's fantastic because it talks about all the context, all the things that brought to a clinical, health promotion or education encounter. We need to be aware of all those things and to find a way through that and to sense I mean, in cultural studies, and I'm not a cultural theorist, but I know enough to say what happens with Indigenous peoples and people of colour in the States is that there's a gaze of the oppressor or a gaze of the coloniser that goes on that person and says, you're not quite right, mate. There's something not right about this equation, about this picture. And in a sense, what Reese was saying, we need a larger gaze, or if the gaze is the wrong word, we need a larger framework that encompasses all these things that are in the mix and going on before we can hope to understand what's going on for someone. And I love the comment in the questions. I won't go to all the questions, there are great questions, but one from Susan, it's looking about how she preferred the term cultural respect. And we have whispers of understanding, like the others we're dealing with, that's the way of phrasing it, only whispers of understanding. I think goes to the heart of what I'm saying as well. All right, let's move on to Juanita. And what I like from Juanita was saying, we are still on the journey. You know, we don't know about this stuff. We can't quite pull off what we want to in terms of producing better health outcomes. And in such a context, perhaps it's wrong to get bogged down in terminology, wrong to get bogged down in the very specific definitions we see plethora out there. You know, I said in the introduction of the briefing paper that looking at one document, 400 about Indigenous cultural competency, threw up definitions of cultural competence. Similar amount for professional cultural competence, a similar amount for institutional cultural competence, and then go on to the models. So we can get bogged down in that stuff. We're looking for the processes that work. I like Juanita about this kind of training, this kind of work is not about cultural voyeurism. That's my term, but I think that's what you're heading for. Cultural tourism, cultural voyeurism. It's about a deeper understanding. And I like you to talk about saying we need to sit and listen rather than to presume that we know. And there's some echoes here of what Melanie was saying about listening, and I think I'll come back to listening at the very end of this. And to say further, it's not just about health, it's about all the domains we work in, right across the board. So I think I better leave that there. I run out of time. I'll come back. You said more, that's all I've got time to do justice to. And some of the things that Melanie was saying, and the very unfortunate and sad time when the Rodney King brought the relationships to the public in her the hospital gaze. It takes to get institutions to look at themselves. Yeah, that's a very sad state of affairs. What is the impetus for institutional change and curriculum change? How do we, in healthcare delivery, change? Not wait until there's such an impetus to bring about the change. You mentioned that cultural humility was developed in contradistinction to cultural competence. But then under questioning, went on to say, but it was coming out of the particular shaping of it came out of a particular moment in time. And, you know, was a big enough person to say, I'm not hung up on the definition. We need to acknowledge what it says, but I'm happy to talk about things in a bigger picture. If I got you wrong, please tell me. Yeah? What's common across the elements we seem to be saying that are working or on the money is that it's about, what's shared in those elements is about oppression and colonisation and racism. To look at the workings of power and privilege rather than knowing something about the other culture. And I'll return to a few things just at the end, Melanie, if I may. You did mention it's important not to fall back on stereotypes, which is kind of a nice barrier, I think. In talking, you know, we fail our medical students. We don't help them to become more critical in their approach. Criticality is what it's about. Look, I'd like to tell a very quick story. In my role at Flinders University, working with the graduate entry medical students, I had one guy come up to me who already had his PhD in the first year of graduate entry into medicine, and we did a half-day cultural safety workshop as a precursor to more things in first year. He came up to me afterwards and said, look, Professor McDermott, I think that was very interesting. Thank you very much for that. I think you need to know something about medical students. We are concrete thinkers. Give us the solutions. And again, I didn't quite know what to say, except that I said, well, I accept that you, and I'm not here to belittle you, because what's faced the system, I'll give you a second story. One day, cultural safety and practice one time, attended by a medical practitioner. The third day was saying, virtually in tears, you're asking me to go against everything I was ever taught with a patient. Referring to was not this ability to listen or open up, but the fact of I need to diagnose, I need to not kill anybody, I need to be competent. As Barry has said, it's not about questioning our skills. Our skills as health technicians are in demand. We need to serve our communities with all the skills that are available to us. But this particular person couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. They couldn't say, I can be a thoroughgoing technician and be open, not know what's going on, to ask those questions. And that's not his fault. That was the system that's failed him in becoming, what Barry said was about becoming, or recognising people as fully human. My colleague at Hong Kong University, Professor L.C. Chan, talks about how he finally got permission to bring into medical humanities into all 6 years of the University of Hong Kong program. So if you're studying at that university, in that medical school, it's part of your training to be a healer. As much as a technician, you study medical humanities for all 6 years. That's the sort of thing we need to be talking about, I think. Barry also said, how do you get people to think? How do you get people to talk about, or to go beyond the proximal, to think about politics, racism, poverty, powerlessness, all the constraints upon one? And this is a question we're trying to address at Flinders as well, with my colleague Dave Sherberg particularly. And what Dave does is if someone puts a problematic question, rather than go at the racialised question or a problematic question, having a go at the person, and some of the person's peers will have a go at them, because they just go and put it up on the board. Let's deconstruct that. Where's that coming from? Let's think about this. So criticality, as Barry pointed out, is a hugely helpful way to get through here. Barry also mentioned that Indigenous health classes are sometimes, or he said all the time, and I agree unless conditions are met, unsafe for the Indigenous medical or nursing or allied health students in them. That's the thing we need to take on board and look out for each other. How do we make the classroom a space for everybody, Indigenous, non-Indigenous? How can students be empowered to feel safe to ask the questions without being shot down in flames? How can we build those relationships so we feel comfortable with each other enough to explore these things in a respectful way? That's one of the questions. I'm also running out of time here. Okay, so I like the idea of developing and graduating health professionals who are able to interrupt racism. Not a small deal. If you're the junior partner on a ward, or if you're the young health professional with very little power out there, your job's on the line. Your reputation's on the line. It's difficult stuff, which is where the institutional change needs to come in to support that person, I would suggest. But at least go out armed with a few strategies of how you might go about it. And the final thing that Barry said in this very brief, I'm sorry I haven't done you justice, Tracy, is when your belly hurts, that's the process of self-reflection. That's fantastic, How can we help students, health professionals and professional development deal with that discomfort, manageable disquiet, Dave and I call it, manageable disquiet. How can we deal with that long enough to stay on the journey that you've been talking about, Wendy, to stay on that journey to come out the other end? That's part of our process. I'll just flick back to say one more thing that reflects back to what you were saying, Melanie. I think you've alluded to also, Juanita. There's a couple of threads running through here, positive ways to work. And these processes behind the different models, I think. You've talked a lot about, Melanie, invitation to dialogue, having the dialogue, listening to each other. And you go on quite profoundly about listening. And it struck me, this is Aboriginal way. This is Aboriginal way. Our Auntie Miriam Rose Ngumea in the Daly River, for those who don't know, is about 200 kilometres southwest of Darwin, has expressed it the most eloquently as Didiri, deep listening, and inner deep listening in real time, contemplation in real time, self-reflection while you're working with someone. Have I got it right? Have I heard you? Have I picked it up in your body language and understanding everything that's going on for you? Am I still enough to shut up? I liked it when I said to you one time, Barry, on a Skype call, I think you were saying, think I was saying about listening, and you said, oh, that's okay. When we send our students out to work in the community, I just tell them to shut up, sit down, shut up, listen. Am I misquoting? But we need to listen. It's about listening. It's about, that is a way through. And yet, that's, I think, the second Aboriginal tenet or notion that I want to introduce to this discourse is my colleague John Reid, who works with Kerry at Poche Alice Springs. And John's a kukataman from middle or South Australia, but working in Alice Springs for a long time. And he says in my culture, it's the 3 R's. But it's not just his culture, it's across Australia, I would suggest. It's respect, relationships, and reciprocity, which I think goes to the heart of what we're talking about. We're saying it from different models or different experiences, but in a sense, those 3 R's, Aboriginal ways, I think they should remain to help. Thank you. I have one more job to do, which is to give our esteemed panel small token, a gift. Academy Award, open the card and it's Reese. Best birthday. Right. Juanita, would you thank Juanita, please? My dear colleague and developing friend, Melanie. Thank you so much. A little longer. And one more bit of fun for those online. One more very pleasant duty to do is to thank Dr. Tom Calmer, Professor Tom Calmer now. Tom is, as you said, patron of the Poche Network, but a tower of strength behind the work we do. Thank you, Tom. Well, I'll hand back to you to...
Allow me to reciprocate. Professor McDermott, thank you. No, it's actually fantastic and a great summary, Dennis, on what we covered today. It's such a broad-ranging topic and contributions. Within about 4 weeks, we should have a Poche opinion paper out, which will capture all of this. And as you saw, Kylie and Kim madly scribing. They ran out of yellow postal notes, so they had to use the big ones. But they're up there if you've got nothing to do, and as you wander out, have a look and see how you go. It leaves me just to thank Reese, Juanita, Melanie and Barry. Again, thank you very much for your contributions. Highly appreciated. Dennis, for your summary. We had both Mike and Yvonne, who was out there walking around with those microphones that didn't work. Adrian for being the timekeeper. What Chris was saying, yeah. Adrian for being our timekeeper, trying to keep us in order. And of course, and don't get excited here, Melanie, but I want to thank the KKK, Kylie, Kim, and Kerry for their big effort. And where would we be without you there in the audience? Thank you. I hope you got something out of it. And all of our colleagues who are online from as far away as New Zealand to outback New South Wales. Thank you all and enjoy the night. Safe travels. Thank you.
I know Michelle's and Ryan's work.
Oh, yeah.